folks, welcome to another conversation on your premium business show. That's Business Redefined. We are privileged to have the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, that's UNCTAD, and we are on set with Rebeca Grynspan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you for having me.
Great. Let's start from here. We're having a conversation at a time when Africa, by and large, has had knock-on effects from a multiplicity of shocks. We had COVID-19, we had Russia, Ukraine. Just what size of a hit, in your own estimation, has the continent taken from this?
Oh, huge. Let me say that we made in the Global Crisis Response Group that the Secretary General of the UN has set up to look at the cascading crisis effect. We have made a vulnerability analysis. And the number of countries that came up last year as being very vulnerable to the shocks were 94 countries, half of them in Africa. And this is not only, because of Mother Nature.
Yeah.
It's because the conditions in which the continent has had to cope with this crisis are really very bad. It's not only the impact of the crisis, it's the ability to cope with it. COVID-19 took away almost all our capacity to cope with a crisis.
Yeah.
Yes? And on top of that, climate change has, really strengthened the impacts. And it has been so severe.
Yeah.
The Horn of Africa, the drought, 3 years of drought here in Kenya, millions of cattle being lost. Yes. What do you do with that? How do you face that? And at the same time, a lockdown and a health crisis at a global level.
Yes.
And then, when we all thought that we were going for a recovery process, the war in Ukraine hits us all with inflation and high energy and food prices. And we don't have the instruments to face these challenges alone.
Yeah.
We need the global community to do that. And the global community was very fast, I think, probably in the financial side, in the COVID-19 crisis, but we haven't seen the same response, with the other crises that came afterwards.
Okay. Quite interesting perspectives there. And speaking about the other crisis, the spillovers from Russia, Ukraine, I really have to ask you this question. You're right at the center of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. What's the latest, given the move we saw by Russia?
Well, I think that the first thing that I need to clarify is that in Istanbul, in July 2022, we signed 2 agreements. We signed the Black Sea Grain Initiative Agreement for Ukraine to be able to export grains through the Black Sea corridor that was agreed with Russia and with Turkey and the UN.
Yeah.
And the second agreement was a memorandum of understanding between the UN and the Russian Federation to facilitate trade of food and fertilizers from Russia to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And it's the 2 agreements that had an effect. Yes, the importance of having been able to bring down international prices of food for 10 months in a row, 23% drop in the food index of the FAO. Yes, and it was because of the 2 agreements that we were able to do that. Unfortunately, Russia decided to terminate the agreement, as you know, just now in July, after a year of the signing of the agreements. And the Secretary General has really lamented that. We were disappointed that Russia did that. They are saying that their side of the deal is not satisfactory for them. In fact, the UN has done a lot, and I have been in charge of that group and that activities, to be able to facilitate trade from the Russian Federation in food and fertilizers. And we have done a lot, but still Russia has decided to withdraw. And so we have seen in the markets, again, the volatility that we wanted to preclude, yes, to avoid. Volatility is very bad, especially for the African continent, yes. You are a continent of small and medium-sized economies. And so it's very difficult to do this by yourself. When trade is disrupted, like it is through the Black Sea, you know, for both countries, for Russia and Ukraine, so you suffer because transaction costs are much higher. You have to pay much more for shipping. You have to pay much more for insurance. Prices in the international markets suffer. And at the end, the household in these vulnerable countries suffer too.
All right. You've got very strong views about the global finance architecture, especially with regard to the elevated debt pressures we've seen among frontier markets. And my question to you is, how do you see us taking this agenda forward? When COVID struck, we had the conversation around special drawing rights and the recalibration of the same. Yep. How do we move from that point?
Well, you know, the special drawing rights and the decision to emit special drawing rights during the COVID-19 crisis was a very important step forward. Now, it's true that the special drawing rights are not distributed fairly. Most of the special drawing rights go to the developed countries, to the countries that don't need them. Yeah. But still, the 1/3 that went for us was very important to stabilize also our currencies at that moment, because they are a very important seizable quantity. Yes, $650 million special drawing rights. You know, that was very important for us. So we were asking for two things. We were asking for a formula to distribute the special drawing rights better, and we were asking for the recycling of the special drawing rights that the countries that don't need them received through two instruments in the International Monetary Fund, in the IMF. The Poverty Reduction Trust Fund, and also the new Resilient and Sustainability Trust Fund, the RST. That is a new mechanism that was established now. We think that both are very important, and important, for example, for a country like Kenya, of the new mechanism, the Resilient and Sustainability Trust, is that it includes middle-income countries. Yes. And so we can apply for, you know, projects for the transformation of our economies. Is that enough? I have to tell you it's not enough. Because we wanted a higher emission of SDRs, and we don't have the international consensus to do another emission, especially some countries have opposed that possibility. And so we have asked for other liquidity instruments. Yeah. Because one of the problems, you know, if you have rising inflation, rising strength in the dollar, rising price of food and fertilizers, you may face a liquidity crisis, not necessarily a debt crisis. Yeah. But if you don't, you know, have the speed to stop the liquidity crisis, you will end up in a debt crisis. Sure. So preventively, we think that the limits for rapid liquidity disposal for the developing countries in the IMF, the limits of that the countries face should be raised, because most of us use it all in the COVID-19 pandemic. That's true. And so now that there is another crisis, what we need is some flexibility. And the important thing about it is that the board can take that decision. We don't have to go for a huge reform to be able to access those windows. And the same in the development banks. You know, we are asking for a scale up of the mechanisms for investment resources for the developing world.
I see. One of the issues which you mentioned during the briefing was around the engagements at a national level with the Kenyan government, for instance, and you mentioned something around productive capacities. Could you give us more flavor around what sort of conversations you're having with the government?
Well, yes, UNCTAD in particular have been supporting the government in several of the enablers for rapid economic growth, yes, and sustainable economic growth. One of them is the digital strategy, yes, and I have to say, you come to Kenya and you are really positively, struck by how developed the
M-Pesa.
M-Pesa system. I was in the Masai Mara park, and we were paying with M-Pesa to the Masai people. Yes, it's impressive what you have done in terms of fintech, but digital has to go across sectors. Yeah. Yes, if not, it comes as an obstacle to other things and other developing activities. So the digital strategy that the government enacted already, then the investment strategy, investment facilitation, and how do you do investment facilitation with investment opportunities at the same time? Yes, is the duo that we need. And so we were talking about that with the president, and also my team met with the technical team at presidency to discuss many of the international standards and what are the dynamics that we see looking at the future, and the whole issue of renewables. Yeah. Yes, you have geothermics and solar and wind, and I think Kenya has already a very clean energy matrix, but you still are lagging behind in terms of universal access. Yes. And if you want to attract energy-intensive industries, and digital is energy-intensive, many people don't realize that, then, a scale up of the investment in renewable energy is necessary.
Okay. The report you've launched this morning speaks to the need to plug into the high-tech global supply chains. And in a market such as Kenya, where a lot of the businesses are operating in the informal sector, how do they do this considering the cost constraints as well as the technical capability constraints?
That's one of the most difficult questions to answer, because most of our economies have an informal sector. And that is too large for the economy. And that is a problem. And that's many times why our last resort is indirect taxes. Yes. Because if not, a lot of the economy is out of the income realm of the government. So I think that one thing is to understand that part of informality is not evasion, but low productivity. Yeah. And so I think that all the programs that support higher productivity development for micro and small and medium enterprises are key. Because most of our employment comes from the small and medium-sized firms, yes, and companies. So we need really to support productivity enhancement. And part of it is to make them, to give them access to the digital economy. In COVID we saw it, yes? Yeah. And they will understand that if they go into that path, they will be more resilient. Because we have already data that clearly shows that those small and medium-sized enterprises that went into digital and e-commerce, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, they were much more resilient and they were able to thrive, and the others died. Yes. So if you make the formality come together with the support, yes, that's the best way in which we can really try to fight the informality curse that many of our economies have. And the other is financing.
Yes.
If you make financing available, so you will move from the informal financing sector that really takes you, it takes all the oxygen from your business, yes, to the formal sector that will be able to give you financing at low cost. So solving the financial problem for small and medium enterprises is part of the answer for the informality problem.
The Africa Continental Free Trade Area, what are your thoughts on it? What are the thoughts on the progress made thus far? There have been skeptics saying, look, we have so many such regional blocks within the continent. The harmonization isn't happening as fast as we thought it should. Yeah. What's your assessment?
Look, I come from a continent that wanted to integrate and couldn't. So I know all the problems around it. And I come from Central America. And I can tell you that the Central American integration market was key to the development of my country, Costa Rica. That is considered a good model and a successful model. We couldn't have done it alone, you know. And in this world, this is a world of blocks. Yeah. Yes. If we don't understand that Europe is moving together, that the US is big and moving, you know, also in terms of strengthening all the ties for their production and trade. If we don't do the same, we won't be able to do what we want to do. Yeah. So here there is like a must reason. Now, is it easy? Is an easy, you know, path? No, it is not, because countries have different levels of development. There is a lot of heterogeneity. But I think that the African continent has given a huge step forward, already agreeing on the African free trade area. Will it be a short-term process? I don't think so. You know, this is a long-term process. But I think that the first thing is convergence. Yeah. Yes? You have many of subgroupings, as you said. You have different conformations within the African free trade area. So use them to converge. Yeah. You know, use them to avoid divergence that will take you away of that path, and try to look at this path on a medium-term perspective. And you have established already an important secretariat, you know, that is working very hard. I think that East Africa has been really a champion of the continental African free trade area. Kenya has had a very important role and voice in it. Perseverance is part of the important, you know, you have to persevere because many obstacles will come this way. There will be many spoilers, yes. You know, that they will come, you know, in the road to real integration. But it's really such an opportunity for this continent that it will be a pity to not take this opportunity really firmly.
Final question, SG. From the global standpoint, we have had a conversation around the rallying dollar and what it means for, especially frontier markets like Kenya. How do you think that has impacted trade, very briefly?
Oh, well, let me say, first of all, we have never seen, at least in my life, an increase in interest rates of the main reserve currency banks as fast and as steep as we have seen this time, yeah, in the last year. And that obviously has a huge impact on us. Is one of the reasons for the strength of the dollar. Trade is dollarized, yes. And so our products are just more expensive. So the imported inflation that we have suffered from domestic prices going up, not because we have done anything, but just because the dollar is stronger, is huge. And it has had a huge social, economic, and political impact in our countries, and no doubt in Africa, as you have said.
Right, that takes us to the close of our conversation with the UNCTAD Secretary General, that is Rebeca Grynspan, touching on a number of issues from global macros, including debt, now cascading to matters regarding trade. We shall continue highlighting these issues, so stay tuned to Business Redefined.